15th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
Jesus says, I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine grower. He removes every branch in me that bears no fruit. Every branch that bears fruit he prunes to make it bear more fruit. You have already been cleansed by the word that I have spoken to you. Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit by itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me you can do nothing. Whoever does not abide in me is thrown away like a branch and withers. Such branches are gathered, thrown into the fire, and burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask for whatever you wish, and it will be done for you. My Father is glorified by this, that you bear much fruit and become my disciples. This is the gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Please be seated. Can you hear me now? The ad campaign that became very popular as cell phones were starting to become more and more in use. And if you remember, the point of the ad campaign was because these little miracles of technology, all of a sudden as we were walking around or driving, all of a sudden you would get static, or sometimes you would just have dead air. You would completely lose the phone call. So the ad campaign, Can You Hear Me Now?, was to drive you towards that company that almost guaranteed you wouldn't lose your connection. You would be right there and you would have what you wanted when you used your phone. Think a little bit about the connections that we have in today's world. Back at the time of Jesus, people would often wait weeks, months, or even years to get a handwritten letter about some important event that may have happened to their loved one or in their lives. Then, if they were really lucky, maybe they had pigeons or other birds that could deliver the message a little bit more quickly. Then over time, it was the horse and rider that would begin to deliver these messages, and that would eventually lead to the birth of the post office. But with the discovery of electricity and then the invention of the telephone, all of a sudden things began to change. Some of you may remember party lines, right? Then eventually you got a phone in your house, but you were always limited by the length of the cord on the wall to how far you could go in the one that you're talking to on the phone. Now we have these smartphones. And not only can we just talk to anyone wherever we may be, we can send a text, we can do FaceTime, we can do all sorts of things, and in a matter of moments, we can talk to our loved ones on the other side of the world. Yet for as connected as we are technologically, I feel like we're becoming more and more disconnected emotionally and spiritually. When it comes to personal interaction with one another, that's been replaced now by emojis, social medias, and texts, where you can't really tell the tone of the texts that being read to you, right? A face, a smile often conveys an emotion that you can't find in written words. And personal relationships, especially when it comes to love and dating, that old concept of face-to-face has now been replaced by convenient apps and swiping a picture based upon a personal ad that best sells your most enticing features, right? But if you're not caught in the first 30 seconds of reading the ad, that's it, forget it. There's no possibility of a personal relationship with there. And now disagreeing with somebody else has been taken to all new anonymous levels as cyberbullying is used to tear down and destroy somebody who doesn't see things the way you see things. And sadly, the gifts of faith are not immune from these troubles. I found one of the biggest challenges that we have in the church today, especially as pastors, is continuing to find ways that the church, with the message of the gospel, can connect to people who are so consumed with these technological miracles. And I often find us wrestling to keep the church church message relevant in this world where we're overwhelmed by this multimedia and all the fancy things that come along with it. And pastors and people who lead in the church are constantly being challenged to reinvent themselves and reinvent how the church does business. We're working harder and harder to reach out and connect with people and seeing fewer and fewer results as a result of that. And this sometimes is incredibly frustrating and incredibly exhausting. And it's to all those things that the gospel lesson on this 5th Sunday of Easter addresses the issue. Jesus says to us, "Abide in me as I abide in you. Just as the branch cannot bear fruit itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. Those who abide in me and I in them bear much fruit, because apart from me, you can do nothing." Jesus is reminding us that in this world that has this disconnection, even though we're so connected to each other, it is still vital and urgent that we remain connected to him. And at the heart and the foundation of the words that Jesus is bringing to us as we continue to celebrate the new life of Easter is that we cannot truly know love and cannot truly know life unless we are connected to the life and the love that Christ has for us. And there's a direct connection between our second lesson, the epistle reading of John, and the gospel reading from John today, where he calls us to remain and abide in Christ. Because these readings in John is reminding us today that the heart of true life and true love is sacrifice, is a connection, a deep intimacy that often isn't found in the things of this life and the things of this world. And it's not something that can be bought. It's not something that can be faked. It's not something that can be found by being disconnected from one another. At the heart of the words that Jesus is reading and giving to us today is the importance of being connected. Connected first to God in Christ Jesus, and then connected to one another. And when we remain and abide in the gifts of the church, those connections break down the barriers of division that so surround us in the world today. In our first reading from Acts, we hear about the baptism of the Ethiopian eunuch. This went against many of the traditional divisions that existed at the time of Philip and at the time of Jesus. Philip was a faithful Jew. The eunuch was a non-Jew, a Gentile of a different race and a different culture. And after they're connected to God by the word, the power of Isaiah the prophet, as the eunuch is reading it, baptism breaks down all the barriers and divisions among them and connects them as this larger family in Christ. It's a reminder to us that in this world that is so often disconnected, our baptisms connect us in ways that the world can't. Our baptisms break down those barriers of division and discrimination and the things that so often tear down and destroy. And every time we have a baptism, like we will in a few minutes, that family is expanded and strengthened and connected in new and powerful ways. And so important is this connection that God expects us to have with one another, that God does not leave us on our own to figure it out. Just as Jesus came to those apostles in the gospel lesson and explained to them the importance of abiding in him, and just as God sent Philip to the Ethiopian eunuch, God continues to raise up servants to help us to connect to him through the gifts of the church. So in a few moments, we'll install Debbie Peltz as our new deacon. Debbie has been moved by God's Spirit to share the gifts that God has given to her, to take those blessings that she has received and formally serve us as her brothers and sisters in Christ in ways that help us see the blessings of God's love and the life that God gives to us. And God continues to raise up such servants so that we remain connected in a world that increasingly gets disconnected because of sin every single day. The The simple question that's being put before us today is that God is asking us to approach our relationship with the Almighty in the same manner that we approach our relationship with our cell phones. God is asking us to ask the question, can you hear me now? And every time we gather here in these gifts of word and sacrament, we hear God speaking to us. We have God coming to us so that we see love and we have life in a whole new way. And when we have this connection with God and remain and abide in Him, it empowers us to love one another and live with one another in increasingly new and better ways. And once we're plugged in, this is a connection we never want to lose.